Okay, so in this video we are going to look at adding scoring. So there'll be a couple elements to this. One, landing on a tile and changing the color will increase your score. Landing on the same tile again will not increase your score because you haven't accomplished anything else into the later levels where you do have to hop on a tile multiple times. And completing the level will also give you a bonus. And then we'll look at landing on the non-lethal enemy nerd here. Hitting him should give you some kind of bonus, and so that will be the last scoring that we'll add. And at that point, you can just build on that. If you add more enemies, you'll see how to handle the scoring. You also notice there's a few sound files. Probably won't get to that in this video. They're not utilized. They were just put into the asset area. We'll probably do that in the next video. And just to call them out, it's called Retro Sound Pack, and I believe the publisher was Mululu. So to give credit where credit is due, and you'll see that probably in the next video. So this one is just going to handle the scoring. Okay, so like a lot of other values, it's really simple how you track it. You have to create a variable. So in our GameFlow script, we're going to create public static int, and we'll call this total score. Actually, let's set that to 0 to begin with. And what we'll do is by the end of the video, we'll add a text object or text object on the scene, and that text object will be set to this value, so it will display that score. But we'll get to that in the end once we make sure the scoring is working. So we've created our variable. It's a static variable, so it's accessible throughout the entire application. Now, if we go to our tile script, this is where we're already checking to see if QBert has landed on a block. Specifically in this section is where we check to see if color status has just changed to 0. If it does, if it has just changed to 0, then this is where we want the score to be added, because this is where the color is being changed, remaining tiles are being reduced, and so this is where we want the score to be increased. So GameFlow dot total score. In this case, it's plus equals, and we'll give them 100 points. So just as this is taking the current value and subtracting something from it, this is taking the current value and adding something to it. So one obviously is subtraction, the other one is addition. We're adding 100 points whenever this condition is met. Now, what else we're going to do, we want let's display this too, because we don't have the text object yet. So let's do debug.log, and we need to declare or state where it's declared GameFlow, and it's total score. Save that. And then, so we said 100 points per tile, so times 28 tiles, that's 2,100 points. But we also want to give people a bonus for completing a board. So we're going to go back to GameFlow, because that is where we check to see if the board has been completed. So remaining tiles equals 0, start coroutine. So that's this one, load next level. So this is where we say wait, because usually there's some kind of pause where you see like a tally or whatever, or the screen flashes color. Remaining tiles are reset, and so this is where we'd get the bonus. So total score plus equals 500, 5,000, whatever, doesn't matter. Now, just to be clear, the reason why I didn't say GameFlow is because I'm in GameFlow. So if you're not in GameFlow, you do have to say where this is located. But when you're in so if you're not in GameFlow, you have to see where it's located. If you're in GameFlow, then you don't. The system is smart enough to know that that's where the variable is declared. Okay, and let's also do debug.log and total score. So, if I did not forget anything, then you should only get 100 points the first time you land on a tile and not again. You should get 500 points, and then the board should reset, and then you should have 3,300 to begin with. So let's now run this. And I've been testing quite a bit, so I increased the delay for the spawning of the enemies. And I wasn't pointing it out, but down here you can see that indeed it is 2,700, 2,800, 3,300. And let's see if it keeps counting. It sure does. So everything was indeed properly reset. Great. So just like that, we've added scoring. Well, we've added scoring for landing on blocks and changing them, and score for completing the level. I do want to do one more. I want to do scoring for when you land on a non-lethal enemy, ones that you're supposed to catch. So for this one, we mentioned that there's an issue with collision because both objects are solid. And I said there's a few ways you can handle this. You can try increasing the mass. So QBert has a lot more mass than the nerd. Reduce the mass of the nerd, increase the mass of QBert. And again, you do that within the rigid body component. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a second collider to the nerd, and it's going to be a trigger collider instead of a solid collider. So by doing that, by adding a trigger collider and have the trigger be larger and totally encompassing the solid collider, the trigger will occur first. The reason why this is important is a trigger does not create a solid impact. So if you want to think of a trigger collider as maybe to checking that you've entered a zone or something that doesn't impede you, like you're in an area of gas or temperature or something like that. So you want to know that someone is in a certain area, but there should be no physical impediment. So you can use a trigger to check that you've entered in that area, but it doesn't actually impact velocity. So we're going to put a trigger collider surrounding the nerd, and it has to be larger than the current box collider. That should not cause any problems because the only script that checks for a trigger is QBert. So the tile doesn't check for a trigger, neither do the other objects. So adding a trigger collider should not cause any functional problems. So we're going to click on nerd. We're going to open prefab. We're going to add component. We're going to do physics, box collider, and we're just going to kind of sculpt this so it's bigger. And I will eventually change the perspective so I'm looking down. But the important thing is, as you can see, that solid collider has to be inside and totally encompassed by the trigger. That way the trigger occurs and there's time to process a change without the solid collision knocking anyone off course. This is actually also very useful in other scenarios too, where maybe you want to check that you're close to something. Like if this is way out here, you could check that you're close to something without actually hitting it. So maybe once you get within a certain proximity, you want it to move, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of legitimate reasons why you would do this, why you'd have a larger trigger. Okay. So we have our trigger. Now, like I said, we'll just take a quick look. So again, on collision, ignores triggers. It specifically has to be on trigger entry. So move Q, which is attached to QBert, he checks for a trigger collider, but only on net. So QBert will currently ignore that trigger collider. The tile objects only check for collision. They do not check for triggers, so they will ignore it. Game flow doesn't get collided with at all. Blobs only check for collisions. So basically everything is going to ignore that trigger object. And again, since the trigger component, since the trigger component again is not solid, it shouldn't create any kind of impact issues. And that's the very reason why we're doing this. So for the nerd script, outside of start, outside of update, outside of collision, but inside the public class, we're going to add on trigger enter. And again, that auto populates if you're using Visual Studio. So now what we're going to say is if other.tag, and again, if it's a trigger, you don't have to say other.gameObject, you just do other.tag. Again, I don't know why, but just roll with the punches and know that that's the way it works. So if the tag of the object that is colliding with the trigger component, if it's QBert, if the tag is QBert, then we want something to happen. Well, let's give you, say, 5,000 points. So we have to say where that score variable is, game flow, not game object. Wow, I am just falling apart here. Okay, game flow dot total score plus equals, and there's going to be a lot of things going on the screen, so let's do like a solid 5,000. So that way we can easily see that that's what you got the score for. So 5,000 points and then destroy game object. And order does matter. I am just totally falling apart. My apologies for any confusion. Destroy game object. Okay, so again, the trigger script is attached to nerd. It's looking to see if a collision with QBert is occurring to the trigger object. If so, increase the score and then destroy the object the script is attached to. The script is attached to all the nerds, but it's only destroying the nerd you are colliding with. I think that should do it. We might still have some weird things happen if he lands at the top here and nerd lands on him at the same time, and there might be like a mid collision here. But again, like I said, there's things that we can do to avoid those kind of collisions. So don't worry too much about the bugs like that. And actually, let's also debug.log. And we're going to game flow dot total score. And sorry, jumping all over the place. How often is he being spawned? So he gets spawned after 4 seconds, and then will be spawned every 4 seconds. So there should be a bunch of them on the screen. And I'm going to keep QBert moving because, like I said, part of what we're trying to do is seeing if there's any kind of collision issues. Actually, it looks like, did I not make it a trigger? I didn't. So here am I sitting saying it's a trigger, it's a trigger, a trigger. I didn't even make it a trigger. I'll leave that mistake in. It's a good teachable moment because now you'll see that it won't have an issue. See? It's ignoring the trigger. So, no problem. No collision issue. because again, it's hitting the trigger, so it's not wobbling. Now, if I left them up here, depending on spawning, it could potentially create an issue. And we can see our score down here. It's going up by 5,000. Okay, so I think that's a really good place to end this video. I had mentioned adding the scoring text, but I think I'll hold off into the next video because maybe I will do a more proper UI and Canvas overview. Rather than doing just a quick score, we can actually walk through some of the benefits of using the UI. So let's hold that off to the next video. So I hope you found this helpful. I hope you have a good day. And if there's any features you want to see, just let me know. Leave a comment. But like I said, we're getting pretty close now because the next video will be putting in the sound effects. We'll put the scoring on the screen. We'll also deal with high scoring. A local leaderboard. It won't be like networked or anything like that. And I think that should do it. So enjoy your day.